Welcome to the Reinventing the White Coat podcast, where we delve into conversations aimed at helping you foster a healthy relationship with your career and yourself. If you're a physician feeling unfulfilled or burned out or want to prevent yourself from going down that path, then this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Jennifer Shaer, pediatrician, chief wellness officer, and executive and life coach. Sit back and relax as we explore ways to live your best life and have a career in medicine. Today, I'm so pleased to welcome Dr. Benjeil Edghill, who is a board-certified ophthalmologist practicing here in New York. And I met Benjeil through his lovely wife, who is a friend and colleague. And I want to thank you today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Great. So when I was chatting with your wife one day at work, I had brought up, I was telling her that I started this podcast. And when I told her the premise, she said, "Oh, you have to talk to my husband. He has a story to share." So I did. I reached out to you, and here we are. So
Yes.
I'm going to let you just sort of start where you feel comfortable and just preface it with just share what you feel good about. And I may interrupt you from time to time to ask you some questions. Okay. But make sure you talk about the thing that I'm the most impressed about, which is the medical mission stuff at some point.
Oh, absolutely. Because for me, that was part of the cure. Um, I guess, the title of the talk is How to Survive Burnout or Surviving Burnout. Um, this is something that I personally never thought I would have to deal with or experience. But the more that I speak to people, the more that I'm realizing that almost all of the medical community is dealing with some level of burnout, whether it's just from frustration of loss of autonomy on their job, changing roles, too much time spent on EMR, even bringing work home. Uh, this is an epidemic. This is something that people need to talk about because it's everywhere, and we're kind of suffering in silence about it. Now, my personal story has to do a lot with my profession, but also a lot with just my personality. I have a tendency, like many in this profession, or many people that I know, to take on a lot of things. Partly because it brings me joy to get involved in things that touch my heart, that I feel empathy towards, that I feel drawn to. But those same type of things that tug on your heartstrings really do start to create little holes in your emotional bucket because it takes a lot out of you. Um, when I experienced my situation, I was helping to manage a family restaurant, which is a full-time job in itself,
Yeah.
along with being an eye surgeon and a landlord and a father and a husband and just a community member who also tried to set up career fairs for young people. And the list just went on and on. And for some things that I mentioned, it was pure joy to do. And other things were just things that I got obligated into doing or felt obligated doing and could not say no. So that I would say is something that a lot of people have a problem with, which is if they're very good at handling hard tasks and people come to them for these reasons, they tend to have a problem saying no because in a way they feel honored that somebody thinks of them that way. And at the same time, they do start to feel that they are the right person for the job, The
Yeah.
problem is there becomes too many jobs.
Yeah. It's funny, Benji. I remember hearing the expression once many years ago, if you want something done, ask a busy person, right? And
And
you're
that's
so
true.
right, especially you're describing, I mean, why we become doctors, those qualities
Yeah.
are what make us so great, but also what put us at risk for exactly what you're describing. And our patients, it's funny, you just described all of these other things you were doing in addition to being a doctor. I can't imagine all those things you're doing, but our patients think of us as just being doctors. Like they think you're
Right.
there for them 24/7, right? Like if you run into one of your patients at like Target or something, they're like, they think it's so weird. You're not working.
It's true. It's true. And right now I work in Staten Island. I live in Brooklyn. And people always ask me, why don't I just start working in Brooklyn? It'd be such a easy commute for me. And I started to realize a little early in my career that I liked leaving my job on an island. Like
Yes.
the actual crossing of the bridge was something that allowed me to separate my home life from my work life. And so many people, that line is blurred. And I'm not just talking in the medical profession. I'm talking
Yeah.
once, especially with the pandemic, where Zoom became so prevalent. There are no set hours for anybody anymore. Everybody's working all hours of the day and night, and
Right.
it's just adding to contributing to this epidemic.
Yeah, I've heard somebody recommend people who are working at their desks all day, at the end of the day, whenever your end of the day is, to turn it off and then to go do something that equals what your commute would be, right? Whether it's to go take the dog for a walk or create some sort of an evening routine that mimics driving over the bridge like you're doing.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah. So this is a free flowing conversation. So I will interject that yes, we got a pandemic puppy. His name is
Oh,
Bruno. He was part of the therapy that helped not just me but the whole family make it through COVID and the quarantine sessions. And walking him is definitely something that helps me take my mind off of things. It helps me to,
yeah.
just kind of put the phone away for a second. If I do have my phone, I'll just be playing music. And I watch him. He seems to have his mission. His mission is to mark the entire neighborhood more than once. And the simplicity of a dog's life and their mission tends to take your mind off of a lot of your problems.
Oh, for sure. They just
Uh,
define what it means to be present, right? I mean, it's
Definitely,
beautiful.
definitely. And
But
this
how
is my
did you
first
know that
dog.
so how did you know that there was something, that you needed a cure, so to speak? You're already
Right.
talking about all these things you're doing for yourself, but at what point did you actually, what was like the breaking point for you?
So what I realized is my sleep patterns changed. And when I say changed, I mean that I was not sleeping. Even if I was laying in bed, my mind was racing. I could not turn my thoughts off. And it's funny how when you experience something like that, initially, if you're a busy person, you actually think it's a great thing because you're like, wow, I don't need to sleep as
Mhm.
much. I could use this time to do more things and get more things done. So you actually start to um, lean into it.
Yeah, it's like a badge of
And
honor.
right, right. But eventually your body tells you the opposite, which is, look, you know, I don't know why we're not sleeping, but I'm starting to feel like I'm running on fumes.
Mhm.
And even though you're still very functional, I mean, there were moments when I'd sit in the car and I'd kind of doze off. So you would doze off at times when you really should feel more awake, more, alert. And I started to become a little frightened by that.
Yeah, nobody wants their
Also,
surgeon to be super tired.
no, but and that's was also amazing about I it's hard to say because I never felt like I was tired in the OR. I was so committed and dedicated to the surgeries, and I that's one of my passions is surgery. So that's where a lot of my energy seemed to divert to when it was needed, you know. Um, it would be more inopportune times that, you know, were did not involve patient care where I started to feel more tired, where I started to feel a little more not myself.
Yeah.
You could and that's also the issue is I think a lot of people are very good at putting on their game face. So like when they're doing their job, when they're doing the things that they're supposed to, they look great. They look completely normal like they always do, and they're suffering in silence because when they go sit in their car, that's when they are crashing. When they not and I don't mean crashing literally, but
Right.
that could turn into that,
Yeah.
unfortunately. But these are the moments when they're alone is when their um I guess you could say their burnout is starting to reveal itself.
Yeah. And it usually, I mean, I don't know for you or not, but usually those are the things that come out with the people you feel the closest with. It's usually impacts
Right.
the family and the friends. And
Exactly. So
so,
that's a a situation where you're I think in some respects it's almost a cry for help, and it may come out negatively. Fortunately, in my case, it didn't come out negatively towards my family, but I did tell them, you know, that this is strange that, you know, I'm not sleeping and I don't really know why I'm not sleeping, but you know, I'm laying here, but I'm not sleeping. I don't feel like I'm sleeping. And so eventually it got to a point where I started to say that I probably need some help for this.
yeah. So where did you
And
turn?
initially I confided in my wife to see if there was something that she thought could help. And so, you know, we tried the usual remedies, chamomile tea, valerian root, uh, you know, putting on white noise and all of these things would help me to fall asleep, but it wouldn't help me to stay asleep.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you've ever experienced, but I'm sure people out there who have experienced insomnia when you're just kind of tossing and turning the entire night, it just becomes exhausting. I mean,
Yeah.
literally and physically and mentally.
It's the one thing,
So
the harder you
yeah,
try, the worse it is.
exactly. So eventually I started confiding in some of my friends, and I was lucky enough that one of my friends was willing to be vulnerable enough with me. And this is somebody I always looked at as somebody who I felt was very strong, who never seemed to let issues get the best of them. And they said, you know, when I felt on a little on the edge or uncomfortable with life, I started to talk to a therapist just to work out what could be the issues.
Mm-hmm.
And my initial reaction was, you know, I don't need a therapist. I'm a surgeon. I'm a
Right.
doctor. I do everything and then some. So why would I need therapy? But the more I spoke to him, the more I realized it was just to help figure out what was going on. It wasn't any I guess demerit to
Right.
any of accomplishments I've made in my past or present. It just was just like you would go to the doctor to figure out what was going on with you physically, if your arm hurt or if, you had some kind of stomach burning, you to go to a therapist to figure out why you're not sleeping or
Right.
why your thoughts keep racing and you can't seem to quiet them.
Hmm.
It started to make sense. So I not only did he tell me that, but he also gave me a couple numbers. So, that was huge because when you give somebody advice and you help somebody, you usually leave the work to them. And when you leave the work to them, they tend not to continue the work or the conversation.
Yeah.
But with the numbers right in hand, it just seemed too easy for me not to, make the next step, which was to make a phone call.
Wow. He gave you a lifeline. That's great.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I definitely give my friend
Yeah.
a lot of credit for that. And I made the phone call and just talking to the therapist on the phone, she immediately sensed what was going on. And that's in a way is a little scary because you are in some respects thinking that your game face is just so good that nobody can figure out what's really going on. But somebody who's seen it before,
Well,
and
she's
now
also
that
trained to,
trained
you may have had a
exactly
good game face for the patients and for other people, but
right. Absolutely. And honestly, I think people who have been through it can also they start to be able to see others who are going through it as well, whether they admit it or not.
so
So it's
how long did it
almost
take you
opens your eyes.
to sort of dig yourself out and recreate where where you wanted to be?
So one of the things that I had to do or that was recommended that by the therapist that I do is take some time off. And that was a very hard pill for me to swallow because in my professional life, I have never even taken a vacation that was 2 weeks long,
Yeah.
much less taking you know months off if necessary. So when that was first suggested to me, I there was nothing but pushback coming from
Hmm.
my mental aspect of my thought process. And it wasn't until I started to question some of my day-to-day, um you know the type of things that I had to deal with in the clinic, whether it was just administrative work, whether it was just seeing routine patients and questioning the diagnosis that I made. These type of things where I was always very confident in my answers, all of a sudden the negative thoughts started creeping in,
Mm,
and I knew that this was not me. And
yeah.
so when you start to not recognize yourself, then you realize that this really isn't a time where you have to step back and reassess.
So you did it,
So
huh? You took the time?
yeah, I took the time off. Part of it was because when I called the human resources department,
Hmm.
they were incredibly helpful. Um, I had no idea what you had to do to actually take time off. I just, I thought it was going to be my PTO. I knew we were paying for some disability insurance, but I had no idea that this had anything to do with that. So when I spoke to the one of the people at Human Resources, who actually I can say is a friend because we've had multiple conversations just in passing, and she was always very caring and always very you know, interested in my family and my just how I was doing in general.
Mm-hmm.
When she started to hear what was going on, she told me everything. So again, another person that
Yeah.
gave me a lifeline. She said, "Look, you need to call MetLife. You need to start a disability claim. You need to do this,
Mm-hmm.
and don't worry about any of the extra things that you're, I'm sure, worried about. You know, your partners will handle your schedule. They'll distribute your patients between all of them, and you'll do the same thing for them if you know,
Yeah.
if they need it. So
Yeah.
don't even feel guilty about it, which inevitably you do feel guilty
Of
because
course.
these are your patients and you just can't imagine
Mm-hmm.
not being there for them. But just like anybody says, you know, one of the sayings that somebody told me that I think is very poignant is an empty bucket can't fill others. So
Yep.
if you have nothing to give, you really can't help other people the way
Yeah.
you want to. And sometimes all you need is a little time to refill, to replenish, to
Mm-hmm.
get back to where you were.
Yeah, but if you
And
go
so,
back into that same setting without
yeah,
how to, you would potentially go right back to where you were. So what did you do with that time off to build yourself and put and make some boundaries? And you must have done some good
yeah,
work.
yeah. So for somebody who's used to working nonstop, there were days when I was I could not even sit down in the house. I felt so used to working. I would drop the wife and children off at work and at school. I became the chauffeur, which was not a job. I mean, it's my job normally in a lot of cases, but I did not like that being my only title. So when I would get home, I would just do laps in the house. And soon I started doing laps at a track.
Mm-hmm.
And I started realizing that these type of feelings respond well to physical activity.
Mm-hmm.
So going out, walking, running, doing aerobics, doing exercise, things that allow your mind not to focus on the things that you normally focus on really help you to refill your bucket.
Mm-hmm.
um, Therapy, just trying to talk about what do you think is causing the issue, and if you have a great therapist, which I did, and at the end, I'm happy to share some of these people's names who gave me a lifeline if you think it's appropriate. But they just the process at the time we were still in person, because this was some years ago before COVID. So the process of actually taking the train to go to Manhattan to visit the therapist felt like I was doing something to help myself.
Mm-hmm.
Just realizing that, every step you take towards regaining your your former, I would say, your glow, your light, your
Yeah.
mojo,
Mm-hmm.
your the it all contributes to making you whole again.
Yeah. Did you think you might
Because
not go back to being an ophthalmologist at any point?
Yeah, well, I ended up taking a total of 3 months off.
Hmm.
But during that time, as you mentioned earlier, I went on a medical mission because I think part of being in a profession that takes a lot of your energy is remembering why you went into it in the first place.
Yeah.
And medical missions are great ways to figure that out because you're seeing the people who need these treatments for just to live. I mean, most of the patients that I do cataract surgery on just want to see the television better, or they just want to
Hmm.
be able to drive at night. But when I went to these other countries and I would do cataract surgery on people who were blind from cataracts, or people who could not even walk around without assistance. And so not only did my surgical skills give that person back their independence, but it also gave the person who had to lead them around and be their eyes, gave them back their life. And a lot of times that might be a child who could no longer go to school because they had to stay home to take care of their grandparent or their parent who was
Hmm.
blind. And so that that impact just it's just a blessing to be able to offer that kind of
And without any of the
that kind of part,
administrative,
that part of yourself. Yeah.
yeah, and without any of the administrative burdens that you.
Yeah. No, exactly. No, no administrative burdens, no, and you don't worry about insurance and
Right.
pre-authorizations and all of that. Yeah, so that helps to get you back to the essence of why you love the profession.
Yeah. So those 3 months, was there anything else that you did or tips that you have for others for things that they can do if they are, um, wherever they are in their spectrum of early burnout or deep
Right.
into
So
it?
I think as I was saying, a lot of the reluctance to take time off or to give yourself a break, which I mean, a lot of people do this. I mean, 3 months off, or if you want to just make it more palatable, 2 months off is something that a lot of people do every year, just as
Mhm.
part of their, normal routine.
Yeah, they call it a
But
sabbatical in like universities, right? But
right, right. And part of it, I think, is the fear that you won't be able to pay your bills,
Mhm.
or that you won't be able to provide for your family the way that you are used to. Or, not only will you suffer, but everybody who depends on you will suffer. So that was part of the blessing of disability insurance, was that
Mhm.
there was a supplemental income coming in that was allowing me to pay my bills the same way I did not have to rely on anybody else to help me to do the same things that I did before. And uh that was very, I guess you could say, liberating,
Yeah, I don't think most
because
people realize that you can get disability for that. You think it's for a broken leg or it's for something physical, but
yeah,
a really good
no,
point to bring up. And most, I mean, if you work at a company and you're not just in, some people in small practices don't have HR departments and things, but
right.
many of the listeners will. And I think people underutilize their HR departments. They really are. There's so many resources available.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and this diagnosis is real. I mean,
Hmm.
it's not something that people, would. Yeah, there was nothing made up about me needing to take a moment off
Yeah.
to recoup. And it made me, I I kind of, I so other things, let's kind of keep to the trend of thought. I'm a religious person, so it just gave me more time to reflect, to meditate, to pray.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I also did start to do more meditation, which you never give yourself that little time. And it doesn't, you could take 10 minutes and
Yeah.
just relax and meditate for 10 minutes, and that can actually really do wonders for your day.
Mm-hmm.
Um, taking Trying to live a life of gratitude where you sit there and you actually count your blessings, or you look at the clouds and realize that it's just a masterpiece. Or, as I was driving home today, a deer just trotted across the road in
Yes.
Staten Island, and just seeing those kind of magical moments for what they really are, and not just looking past them.
Yeah. So focusing on the deer and the nature and not on the tick and the Lyme disease, right?
Well, you're still in your car, so hopefully you won't get a tick or anything. But
No, you're
just
so right. Did you
I
make
started
any
to
changes?
realize.
I was
I'm
wondering,
sorry.
did you make any changes also when you started your store? You had so many things that you felt almost were burdens. Did you
Right,
let go of
right.
some of those things to create more space?
Absolutely. Yeah, I realized, and that also came through therapy, that there is you have to be able to say no. That's a skill that you have to develop. You have to learn how to protect yourself. You have
Mhm.
to be able to see the signs, because the same reason that you burnt out the first time, usually you're living in that environment, so it can happen.
Yeah.
Just like it happened the first time, it can happen a second, a third, a fourth time. So you have to, if you start to notice that you're sleeping or your sleep patterns are not the same, if you're starting to feel anxious about things that you normally don't, if there there are so many, as I mentioned before, the negative thoughts, just sitting down and you're kind of going through negative thoughts. These are moments when you have to take a beat, think about, what's really going on. And I make it a point now, whereas in the past, we would have so many patients, we would work straight through lunch. I make it a point to, even if I just take 10 minutes, 15 minutes for lunch,
Hmm.
I leave the building. I think it's so important to just walk away from the work, to walk
Hmm.
away from the computer for a midday break. And during that midday break, not only will I, if I have more time, I'll actually walk to the park, which happens to be down the street, and I'll, walk around and just look at nature. If I don't have a lot of time, I may just go into my car and sit in my car and I'll pray. And it doesn't matter how cold it is, or how,
Yeah.
if the weather, I'll take my umbrella and I'll just sit in my car and I'll eat my lunch and I'll say a prayer, and
Yeah.
I'll, take that moment to just mentally reset. Um, you definitely want to spend time with your loved ones, but quality time, not just, the time to just come in the door, tell them to wash the dishes, tell them to take out the garbage. No, you want to sit at the dinner table with
Hmm.
the television off, ask them how their day is, tell them something that you've learned today, ask them what they've learned today. Um, all of these little practices, staying off of social media.
Yeah.
I personally try my best to not spend any time or very little time on social media. In fact, I suspended most of my accounts completely. But
Yeah.
living in the world we live in, it's hard to completely, not uh, communicate here and there with
Yeah.
it. But
Yeah.
I
Yeah. Let
I
me ask
try
you one
not
other.
to stay on it too long.
Another question, and I've taken up so much of your time, but I'm curious, you did so much work on yourself and you got so much support from individuals in this story. I wonder if you feel like the other piece of this horrific puzzle, which is the organization you work for, did you feel that they in any way made any accommodations or acknowledged this, or, because we always talk about how brutal the system is to us. And we have a lot of work to do there, but do you see any changes happening at your organization?
Yeah, actually, my organization has done a lot in that respect. They've created a wellness curriculum where not only are you supposed to try to sign up for different challenges, whether those challenges, and it was funny because I just signed up for a challenge recently, which was I will sleep 7 hours a night, which doesn't even, I mean, it's a challenge for some people. But they have, drinking more water, and they give you have access to a wellness coach if you're interested, and that is for free.
That's
And
great.
I think this is all because they realize that this is very prevalent. This is
But do they
not
do anything
rare.
structurally? Like, like you said, you don't get a break for lunch. Like, do you feel like it's still volume, volume, volume and push, push, push? Are there any use of care teams or
No,
extenders or anything to lighten your workload?
so
We have a long way to go there. I was just wondering.
right. Yeah, I would say don't wait for your job to fix your life.
Yes.
I think we all have to set our own boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
I think every job wants to get as much out of their employees as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And I think despite that, you have to take breaks. You have to set boundaries. You have to say, well, I am not going to get to this in-basket message today, but I will get to it tomorrow, or I will delegate this to someone else who can handle it, because a lot of us are also not great at delegating responsibilities because we feel that we're the only ones we can trust.
Yep.
But we have to get better at delegating. So I understand what the question is, but I would counter it by saying that it's because it's your life and only you know what you're going through. You have to be very good at setting boundaries and saying, and as I said before, learn how to say no. It will save your life.
Oh my God, that is such a beautiful way to end it. I could not agree with you more. This was really, I really can't thank you enough, Benjeil, for sharing this story and for joining me today. And
My pleasure.
I want to thank the listeners for choosing again, as I always say, for spending your precious time with us today, and that I hope to see you again on our next episode of Reinventing the White Coat. Thank you again, Benjeil.
All right. Thanks, Jennifer. Have a great night.
You too. For this episode of Reinventing the White Coat. If you enjoyed this conversation, subscribe now so you don't miss an episode. If you're interested in coaching or in being a guest on the podcast, you can reach out to me online at shaercoaching.com. Thanks for listening, and don't be afraid to live your best life.